Welcome to the HIT Podcast, HIT, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. As we do every week, we are dropping into your feed with what I hope are bite-sized, digestible, really well-curated conversations going on in the space. This week's episode will be no exception. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, I bring on my guest, Kevin Lawrence. Kevin, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, right on. You know, we came across each other. You have a book or several, and just some great talks and conversations and thoughts. And maybe before we dive into it too deeply, if you could just give the audience just a quick high level overview of sort of, you know, who you are and your kind of professional CVs and you know,
Sure.
why you might have some cool things to talk to business leaders, human resource professionals.
Yeah. Well, I've spent the last 30 years working with, the executive teams of growth companies and helping them to scale and grow, and usually want to grow, 10x, 5x, whatever it happens to be. So we're a part of that journey for the last 30 years. And, the people piece of the business is the most important piece. Strategy sounds complicated and like you need to have some special education to do it. Strategy is simple. The people piece is the hard work, and the people are the fuel that enables the engines of growth. So we've learned lots about it, and we work with people on that part of it a lot. So dialing into people is what makes it all work in the end. So we're happy to share kind of with stuff that we've learned along the way.
Yeah, I'd love to get into that real quick. Maybe if you don't mind shouting out, a book or putting on your oxygen mask first, or anything you want to let the audience know. They should take a look
I've got two major ones. I was a key contributor to a book, Scaling Up, which is about scaling the org. Your oxygen mask first is about scaling yourself, and how do you ensure that you and your team can continue to grow and thrive under more pressure and a larger org. And then the most recent one, the 4 forces of growth, is how do we sustain the growth and not get caught up in all the challenges and problems of growth, and stop our own growth inadvertently. And our firm implements the stuff in companies, that's where it comes from. It's real world learning in the boardrooms, not just theory.
Yeah, and I'd love to dive into some of that real world learning. As you mentioned, Toby, we've been doing this for decades. I've got a few thoughts on sort of what translates to success and what teams and team leaders should hear, about that stuff. So maybe just kind of turn it over to you to wrap a little bit down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, at the end of the day, usually it's a few simple things that really make organizations thrive. And when a few of those simple things stop, they get into trouble. And when in the 4 forces of growth, the idea is it's almost a discernment layer you put over all of your executive level thinking, which is, are these things going to drive the actual growth of the business, which is normally, like the core unit, the X, whether it's number of customers, number of subscribers, number of units, number of locations, whatever number of salespeople or consultants. Does it drive the core unit and create a larger organization, or does it optimize the unit and create better quality and efficiency and profitability and satisfaction? So along the way, people often get lost in focusing on making things better, and they work really hard at that, and they do make great organizations, but the actual growth engine gets starved and they stop becoming bigger. And that's a lot of what our work is, discerning between, do we need to focus more on better or more on bigger? Obviously, you need some element of growth, but that is that discernment in the middle of it. It's like being a pilot in turbulence. It's hard sometimes to make the right choices.
Yeah, I guess unpack that for me, because when you were saying an organization might make a better, I don't know, mousetrap for lack of a better word, but still starve the growth engine. Can you tease that out for me? That's an interesting concept to grapple with.
Yes. So as organizations any organization is in a scaling mode, they are adding new customers or products or services or locations, and they are becoming larger at an operational level. They are serving more customers in some way. But as organizations get big, and there becomes the more people you serve, the more problems you have. And organizations get big, it's very easy, and I call it in the book, to get caught up in the pull of problems. Problems have a lot of drama and a lot of pain. And if you're not careful, inadvertently, you'll get so consumed with solving the problems to make things better that nobody has any time to spend on growth and making the organization bigger, including all the senior leaders in the company. And so inadvertently, we end up with a really well-optimized business that stops growing.
Yeah, it makes me want to quote the philosopher Biggie Smalls, "Mo money, mo problems." It sounds like.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, that's what it is, though. But that is what happens. And inadvertently, we don't, human beings are so wired to follow problems and drama that we don't have the discernment to know which problems should be left alone. And by the way, a huge amount of problems should be left alone or left to frontline people. But executives get consumed in them. And because we get intrinsic reward for solving problems, we get bonuses and accolades and great customer shout outs for solving problems. Your culture can become about solving problems, which is a good thing. But then everyone gets pulled away from the thing that brings in more customers.
Is there a facet of this that the old adage, what got you here won't get you there, applies, right?
Yeah.
Because what I'm thinking about is you're talking about growth and scaling. And if we
Yes.
take this all
Yes.
the way down to really fundamental, super basic example, if
Yes.
I myself as a single person run a hamburger stand, then my problem is making a good hamburger, being there on time, and handing over a good hamburger, right? And if you
Yep.
go all the way to the other side of the spectrum, McDonald's problem that especially the executives are grappling with really ultimately probably has nothing to do with it. It's about franchising and land and leases and brand, like all the things that go into, they'll openly admit they're not the best hamburger. They don't need or want or even try to be the best
Correct.
hamburger in the world, right?
Yeah, and they're not selling hamburgers, they're selling convenience so they can get away with
Right.
that. But yes, it's very challenging. And a lot of people, this, there's a metaphor in a book called spatial disorientation, but that happens to pilots. Often when pilots have bad things happen, it's because they get disoriented in the middle of the turbulence or the weather or the glare off something at nighttime. And they passionately make the wrong choices. Passionately, with conviction. And that's what happens in this. So yeah, to go back to the hamburger stand example, that person's working all day and trying to negotiate with vendors who are doing price increases and all that stuff. And if you get lost in that, you can have the best hamburger stand in the city you're in, but you won't end up with your second or third or 14th
Right.
because it can consume everything. So growth companies end up generally having to have instead of 100% perfect hamburger stand, settle for 90-ish% and then leave excess energy to put into growing it.
Well, yeah, because again, I guess to really continue down the thread, there's so much space in between the single hamburger flipper guy and McDonald's where it's like maybe somewhere along the way your company gets its 10th employee, its 50th employee, its 200th employee, and you as an executive are sort of getting pulled between what I used to be involved in and what now
Yep.
I need to give off. And,
Yep.
I'll sometimes I keep coming back to that stupid Indiana Jones analogy, but where he had to like swap things without messing the weight up, right? Where you're sort of like, as
Yeah.
you're taking a little and giving a little, you don't just sort of overnight rip off, I now no
No.
longer touch this at all, right? It comes in these sort of phases and waves and parts of the organizational skin shed from an executive level.
Exactly. And that's what happened. And unfortunately, that can shift towards the positive or the negative. So if executives are focused on growth a lot, they can gradually get pulled away until all of their time is internal and all of their time is dealing with issues versus the other way when it's external and focusing on growth opportunities. And every role, like we get people to assess like how much of your time ideally would be focused on growth. So if we take an HR leader, a bunch of their time should be focused on growth, which is getting future talent or developing future leaders versus dealing with day-to-day problems and operational stuff. So in every role, I don't know, every role is different and what they need, but it's so easy to get pulled down into the problem solving versus the things, because the idea of growth, it's building relationships and getting resources that benefit the organization 2-3 years down the road, usually maybe 1-2-3 years down the road. It's almost got nothing, growth has nothing to do with today because you can't affect growth today. You can solve a problem today. So that's where it's hard because we're getting pulled to do short-term stuff, plus laying down foundations and getting resources for the future.
Well, and I think that I'm glad you started with this word because if you really look at the theme of everything we're saying, discernment's a great word where we're trying to say,
Yes.
I need to figure out what amount of my time I allocate to this versus that. And so I guess what I would ask you then is, as a leader, if one of the things Kevin Lawrence is here preaching is, guys, maybe an underrepresented but super important skill to think about is discernment and where you go chasing
Yes.
after. How does
Yes.
one I don't know, measure one's discernment or improve one's discernment or step back and say,
That's way too hard. The idea is here's the simple thing that we share. So there's a framework in the
I'm
book
like,
that
you
has
wrote the book, dude. Come on.
I
You're the guy to
know,
ask.
but there's a simple answer because to analyze your discernment is not easy. But here's the way we make it really simple for people, based on your role and based on the company's strategy. If you look at the strategy and how you support the company's strategy, ideally, before you get caught up in your day to day, you just do some thinking. What are the activities I should be doing that help to drive the growth? And how much of my time should I spend on those? So let's say you're an HR leader and you're driving the growth of the talent and development. And then there's all the operational stuff in HR. Let's just say you decide you should be spending 30% of your time on growth, which is future leaders in particular for the organization, external and internal. Say it's 30%. And that matches the strategy. Then you just look at your calendar and make sure 30% of your week is in that direction of things that truly build talent, not administering the HR part of the business. That's it. So we just get people to look at the percentage of their time in growth activities and what those specific things are that directly drive it. And people can self-calibrate really easy on that stuff.
Yeah. And I almost wonder if that doesn't mean to say to people, look, it doesn't need to be perfect. You don't need to get out the scalpel and do all this stuff. But even having the conversation, thinking about the ideas with yourself to where you sort of zoom out. And maybe this probably leads into your other book about putting on your oxygen mask first, right? And team building, where you go, look, here's what I need to do. I need to at least have the conversation with myself and my calendar and say, I'd like to be doing more of this. And maybe that awareness at least drives you in the direction a bit more. And so we can get
that's it.
a bit better, and perfect doesn't need to be the enemy of good, you know?
No. Well, that's what it is. So I was actually speaking at an insurance conference on Saturday from when we're recording this. And one of the things that we had them to do is say, look, just imagine you had one extra day a week for growth, right? You're doing what you're doing. Ideally, people usually need to spend a bit more time. Most people say that. They know that it's just hard. So if you just had one additional day per week to spend on the growth to support and enable the organization's growth, what would that be? And what would you do? And you don't need to make a dramatic change. You just need awareness that often we're doing low value things when we could be doing higher value things that actually enable growth. Because put it this way, if we don't have enough great leaders, we won't grow. So like right now I'm down in Boulder, and we do an annual field trip with a bunch of CEOs to spend some time with Jim Collins, who's the founder of the best strategy for enduring great companies. So everyone's gathering here tonight and the sessions tomorrow. But one of the things that, he, in his research, he talks about level 5 leaders. And in his session, he talks about you need to have 90% of your key leadership roles filled with level 5 leaders, or what we would call ACEs, people that are really, really good at their jobs and match your culture. And if you, as a head of HR, your job for the HR leaders is to make sure that the senior, the top few layers of the company, in simple terms, is stacked with awesome people.
Yeah.
But that takes a lot of work and a lot of proactive energy. And most people have a hard time putting enough energy into it. No different than a head of sales and driving sales growth. Everyone's got their things. But those key leaders are like, without it, like, it's so much harder than it needs to be.
Yeah, that's it's interesting because I feel like sometimes we can overthink these things.
Yes.
And sometimes, an answer that might seem kind of like the first thought that would have come to your head if you just backed up and said like, "Hey, what's a good no duh thought?" And you're like, "Well, no duh. Like, go spend a bunch of time, as much as you need, but find really, really good leaders and put them in the right spots."
Yeah. So, for example, when again for a leader in HR, as you're planning your week, your month, your quarter, there's all the stuff to do with your HRIS system and all these other things. There's also this thing called networking with talent. Talking to great senior talent that you could be recruiting for the medium term in your business, or talking to your real up and coming leaders. And so it's not that you have to totally flip the script, but generally, if you could spend another 4 to 6 hours a week, 8 hours a week, even 4, working on the highest value talent that is the engine versus getting caught up in all the meetings and internal things. Like it's not rocket science, as you know, and people know, everybody knows, but you just got to prioritize those growth activities first, ideally. Otherwise, the organization's going to be coming from behind or running from behind.
Yeah, yeah. So we've wound up down a fascinating rabbit hole, and I just wonder if we can't back ourselves out and maybe give you a new prompt of what are some things that we haven't touched on yet that are, in your opinion, important, or you'd like to say, hey, listen, we haven't gotten to this topic yet, but while we have, some time
Mm-hmm.
left in the episode, it would be meaningful for us to touch on this or that.
Mm-hmm. The other thing, and again, if I'm looking overall at business as they're scaling and leaders as they're scaling, obviously we know we need to learn and grow. That's normal. The best leaders do. The best leaders are pushing and high performing and really making things happen. But there's all that logical stuff. I think if I look at it from people decisions, working with the senior executive team to make the hardest decisions. Nobody wants to make the hard choices. And it's very, very difficult. And my belief, and going back to, we really, in our clients that we work with, push to really get the strongest executive and leadership teams possible, which means very passionate, active development of those people. Like, we believe there's annual performance reviews are interesting, but they don't move the needle enough. We believe on a quarterly basis with your key leaders, how are we going to help them to get stronger or thrive in their roles, or how are we going to help them sustain that level of amazing performance? But frequently working with those people, and a lot of people get lost in other things and don't do it. So, our for us, we get the CEO and executive team to go through their key leaders and talk about where they're at and what has to happen, and commit every quarter to what they're going to do to either develop or engage that top talent. And again, it's so basic, nobody does it because it's
Well,
hard.
it is. And I constantly like rail against this idea that in today's day and age, there is so much work and so many deliverables in most people's job and day that you
Yep.
can look yourself in the eye and say, I've given an honest 8 hours today. I didn't cut any corner. I wasn't,
Yes.
messing around. I really gave a decent effort. But what did that go to, right? And you go back to the old school matrix of important, urgent, right? And
Yes.
stuff that is important and urgent obviously takes precedence. And stuff that is not important, not urgent. So, scroll on Instagram stuff, unless you're looking at the hit podcast, keep doing that. That, you don't get too much on. But those
Yeah.
sort of middle grids of not overly important, but seemingly urgent, right? Some crap that's just on fire
Yep.
ends up taken away from stuff that is important, that we would objectively say is important, but there's no timeline on it. It's not urgent. It's not something we have to get to. And miring yourself, again, it goes back to your discipline from earlier. And
Yes.
the thought I wanted to like finish this with, and then I'll turn it over to you to kind of give your feedback on this bigger thought here. But taking the discernment, taking the important non-urgent boxes, and then when you're talking about leadership and you're talking about developing leaders, I think that busyness, in my opinion, gets people to end up saying to the people that are below them, they're the employees that they're trying to nurture, there's an expectation they come to me. There's an expectation they bring their plans to me. There's an expectation this, that, and the third. Whereas if I can challenge myself to go into that important but not urgent box and make contact with these guys, and I'm going to them and I'm developing, and as you said, not annually, quarterly, and perhaps even monthly. Hey guys, here's the
Yes.
proactive plan for you this
Yes.
month, that sort of a thing. So
Yes.
I'll turn that idea over to you to just kind of put a bow on for us.
Right. So, for example, when we work with CEOs and their teams, right, and obviously the head of the people in the business is a critical part of those teams, is that when we work with them, it's the CEO and execs to set the strategy and what's most important, and to have people align their work to that generally. And that's why in our strategy work, we have goals about notably strengthening the team in most of our clients, because again, people are the engine of growth, unless they're capital intensive and you also need a bunch of capital. And getting them to do the work. What's interesting is we're all the same as humans. We usually spend between an hour and 90 minutes every quarter when we work with companies to go through the top leaders, assess, and come up with those plans. But if we don't do it in the room, it doesn't happen. Because in many ways, we bring the discipline ongoing to the team because it's hard. And the CEO and executive, they're getting pulled in many, many different directions. Like, it's really hard to stay focused. And the way I look at it on these core disciplines, particularly around people, it's almost like if you've got a college football team If you let the players start to run their own practices and run their own plays, they're going to have great intentions, but it's going to fall apart. You need someone to keep driving those disciplines and to keep the intensity and focus up. And so when it comes to the people piece, if you're not working on it and discussing it as a team, as an executive team, every 90 days, the discipline won't exist. It can't. It's next to impossible. And then our key people don't get the feedback and support they deserve to grow. And then also our team doesn't get the respect they deserve when we have someone who doesn't thrive and we need to make a change. And whether the change is changing their job or whatever it happens to be. So if you don't actively manage at the executive level and have a discipline, it's going to be mediocre. It can't help but, because without that, the executive team rallying behind it, they're the ones that have to make those hardest choices. And so I look at it from the outside, our job is to help them to crystallize the strategy, of which this is a key component, and then making sure we're making the choices. And that has to come from the top. And at the end of the day, one of the key things in Four Forces is one of the axes is courage versus fear. Courage only comes from the executive suite. If the executive suite is not bringing courage and creating an environment where people are courageous to take chances and make mistakes and do things and learn, it'll just gradually slide back towards fear. And then everyone will be in, it becomes bureaucratic. People want to just focus on covering their butt and no one will make the choices. Because at the end of the day, humans are super smart. We know what we need to do, but we need the right leadership, or we need to provide the right leadership to enable that. And there's a lot of courage required in it, and it needs to be led from the top.
Kevin Lawrence, multi-time author, consultant, business speaker, spending tonight with Jim Collins, it sounds like. Thank you so much for spending time with us here. I appreciate you so greatly. That's all the time we have for you on this week's episode. I want to thank the sponsors. Keep the lights on. We're blessed to be here. Rula, TrueHue, Excel Health, Montage Insurance Solutions. Thank you guys for watching. Join us next week. Join us every week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.